5 weeks ago, the earthquake struck Pakistan, and then it almost disappeared from our papers, from our television screens, from our minds. Perhaps it was just one natural disaster too many this year. But here's the aftershock. The situation there is worsening by the day. The death toll continues to rise. It's close to 90,000 now. 3 million people are still living without shelter, and a harsh winter is weeks away. The UN says conditions in Pakistan are worse than after the tsunami, that it's the biggest humanitarian nightmare it's dealt with, ever. Even if you've read about the earthquake, even if you've seen the pictures, nothing can prepare you for being there. It's hard to imagine that all this happened in 2 minutes. The towns look like they'd been bombarded by a brutal air force for weeks. It's hard to believe that this happened 5 weeks ago. It could have been yesterday. Nothing has changed. Even the horizon is still strewn with rubble. There are sights which defy belief. Streets littered with clothing, sent up by charities and discarded by people. They don't need tattered shirts. They need shelter, food, water, medical care. The large relief agencies and governments are doing what they can in the cities and the towns, building tent cities for the homeless, handing out food. But go up into the mountains. That's not snow you're looking at. Half that mountain was simply sliced off. Helicopters drop food to villages, but there are no relief workers on the ground, except for, listen to this, 13 paramedics from New York City. They came to Pakistan with no backing or support or agenda except to help. They wound up in Pakistani Kashmir, a disputed territory of undisputed beauty. When they were dropped off here, Chris Summers was surprised to learn they were all alone.
I can't believe we haven't seen anyone else in this valley. Yeah. There's such a need here, you know, and we're isolated here, so I don't really know what's happening in the rest of the country. But in this valley, Jhelum Valley, an enormous need. And how is it possible there's just us, you know, 13 knuckleheads from New York here?
Knuckleheads? This is Bin Laden country, dotted with training camps for jihadists, where Islam is at its most radical and America is seen as the enemy. But now, people were walking for miles to be treated by the Americans. Some 200 a day were making their way to the clinic, people who were being cared for the first time since the earthquake. Joe Connolly works at St. Vincent's Hospital in Midtown Manhattan.
You're cleaning wounds of people who have infections, and if the infections aren't treated, they're not going to live.
That's true. I mean, we're saving lives, many lives, every single day. You know, as a paramedic in New York City, once in a while you have that direct influence on life and death. But here it's happening every half an hour, you know.
In New York, their job is to keep a patient alive and drive that ambulance to the nearest hospital. Here, there are no hospitals or ambulances. No stretchers either, except this one, which they made out of floorboards.
Yeah, just hold some gauze here. I'm going to start irrigating it.
Their clinic? A tent next to a military hospital which had been demolished. There was no running water and no electricity, so they were operating by flashlight.
There's 2 layers. Yeah.
There were tremors, aftershocks all the time.
Yep.
Yasser Bashir Coker brought his little sister to the clinic.
Had you ever seen Americans before you came here?
No. No, first time.
What was your impression? What did you think of the Americans?
They are very cooperative, beautiful, and handsome.
They're very beautiful, cooperative, and handsome, you say?
Yeah.
Nick Lobel Weiss works at New York's Roosevelt Hospital and was instrumental in putting together this group of beautiful and cooperative people.
What is it about you that inspired you to come here under the most dangerous, primitive conditions? What do you think it is about you guys?
Healthcare workers want to help people. And I think people, if sometimes, I think the
Nick,
difference...
you keep saying that.
Yeah.
You keep saying that.
Yeah.
But 13 of you came from New York City. You've got no connection with Pakistan. You'd never been here before. You don't know any Pakistanis. You came here, and hundreds of thousands of other people didn't even think about it. What is it about you guys?
Maybe we're New Yorkers and we don't want to take no for an answer.
Word of where they were and what they were doing was getting out, not only to Pakistanis needing care, but to relief organizations. Several sent people to help. So the New Yorkers decided it was time to move further on, to places where help had not arrived. The only way to go? A mule train, laden with supplies the paramedics had begged, borrowed, and pilfered from every stockpile they passed. We would go with them, further up the valley, into an area which has been forbidden to foreigners for the last 50 years. It is, in fact, a war zone, a rugged region close to the contested border between Pakistan and India. There were occasional remnants of a road, where it hadn't collapsed into the ravines, where it hadn't been buried by landslides. But you couldn't get anywhere on this road, at least not in a vehicle.
Back to you, Nick.
The fault lines seemed to be everywhere.
God.
The first town on the way, Chinari. There are survivors from Chinari, but there's no town. There's nothing left.
Post office box is still open.
It's still there.
Look at this. They're cutting hair. The barber shop is open.
Yep.
More than 10,000 people perished around here, many of them children, crushed when their schools collapsed. The concrete blocks double as gravestones. There are still dead children underneath. With every step, another tale of tragedy. Entire families wiped out.
I lost about 25 members in my 12 homes, just in the family of 12 homes, and the same story is everywhere.
It's really, I don't know what kind of smoke signal needs to go up to know that this village is devastated.
Smoke signals are being picked up in other parts of the country. The U.S. military has sent in badly needed helicopters. It set up a MASH unit in the worst-hit city and brought in Seabees to help in reconstruction. The U.S. is doing more than any other country and freely admits it's being active, at least in part, for strategic reasons, to combat anti-Americanism in a Muslim nation. And as it learned in Indonesia when the U.S. military went in after the tsunami, nothing does this as well as helping people after a disaster. This is not why the New York medics came here, of course. They didn't come to win hearts and minds, but to save lives. Hearts and minds just seem to follow. And that's fine with Steve Muth.
We can inoculate an entire valley, if we're lucky, against radical Islam because, you know...
Against radical Islam, against anti-Americanism.
Right. And it's so simple. I'm just a paramedic. It's just a bandage. It's not, it's not $100 million ad campaign for Madison Avenue. It's nothing, it's not complicated. Could something work better to change somebody's mind? I can't think of anything.
What's going on?
This is it, huh?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to just go
The
with
mule
this.
train took them to a place called Katai, to their new clinic in another field of rubble. It was now 3 weeks since the earthquake, and they were the first help to arrive.
You should get some gloves on.
They went to work right away on wounds, infections, gangrene, dysentery, pneumonia. There's already lots of pneumonia, and there will be a lot more now that winter's coming.
Do you have enough antibiotics?
No.
Do you have enough anesthesia?
No.
Do you have enough hypodermic needles?
No.
Do you have enough water?
No.
Do you have enough food?
No. I don't think there's anything you could possibly list that would make it sufficient for a group of 13 people to treat, a valley of thousands, of tens of thousands of people. So basically, what we're doing here is we're putting a Band-Aid on a wound the size of Texas.
And as Ruben Flores explains, they were doing serious surgical procedures with no anesthetic.
It's tremendously painful. And some of these people, especially some of the older gentlemen and ladies of this valley, just stood there with a straight face, as if pain were something they'd lived with their whole life, and this was nothing different. In our country, we would have done that without anesthetic. We would have been sued. Here, they thanked us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have to draw.
Okay. One in the sun, morning, sun, and then...
There wasn't always a translator, so they all had to find other ways to communicate.
One, morning, One night. 5 den. Good?
One guy came up to me yesterday and was holding out his hands like this. And I'm looking, I'm like, oh, does he want treatment, you know? And he was signaling me to put my hands out. And he said, we have 5 fingers, arm, elbow, elbow. We're the same. And then he shook my hand. You know?
14-year-old Menaz Bibi's hand was caught under rubble.
Yeah, go ahead. Peel this back.
All the medics could do was cut away the dead and gangrenous flesh. Will she ever have any use of her hand? That depends on how quickly she can be medevaced to a hospital.
Sometimes you call, and those poor people have to wait day after day, sitting there.
But a helicopter did come and headed for an open field. They took her there on the run. But the chopper never landed.
I mean, when's the next one? Next week?
The only certainty is the next patient. There's always a next patient.
Are you going to stitch that back?
No one had ever seen so many kids with so many head wounds.
Shake it, shake, shake, shake. And then it's Zuba. Shake, shake, shake. It's
Not only were wounds being treated for the first time since the earthquake, children were laughing for the first time too. All it took was a surgical glove and a New Yorker named Nick. But then, an 18-month-old boy is brought into the emergency room. That's the space behind the blanket.
Do another I.O. on his other side. See if we can get a better running I.O. and we can DC this side.
His name is Nadim, and his father carried him down the mountain, 5 hours. Nadim's mother had a heart attack and died when she saw their house collapse and kill 10 members of their family. And now, Nadim is dying.
Let's just get him going. He has about an hour.
120.
Let's do it.
He'd hardly eaten since the earthquake. He has double pneumonia and is dangerously dehydrated. The only hope is to get some fluid into him quickly and to get the Pakistani army to send in a chopper.
We need to get him out of here. He's completely unresponsive. He's not responding anymore.
They can't find a vein, so they have to inject the drip directly into his shin bones.
No. First, try and aspirate. Phil, I'm pushing this in.
It's too big, man. You're going to screw up his bone.
It won't screw up his bones.
Nothing. Squeeze no way, it's going in. Okay, you're in. Let's get a little D5 saline.
And then, a sign of life.
Look at him up in his eyes now.
Yeah, he's lifting his leg.
Yeah. Yeah.
There we go.
He's crying.
You've never been so happy to see a kid cry.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, we thought he was about to die.
Yeah, but now he's crying, and that's good.
And things may get even better. A chopper. But will it land?
Yeah. Joe will stop him. He'll jump on that skid if needed be.
It does. And the medics hand the boy over to his father.
You give him back his son. His son's going to be fine. You can see it in their eyes. They're not going to forget you. Then they're not going to forget you're from where you're from. It'll be 2 generations. They'll still be saying, you know, when you were a kid, it was the Americans that came after the earthquake. They won't forget.
Two days after that helicopter took off, we found Nadim in a Pakistani hospital. He was doing okay. We also learned that Menaz Bibi, the girl who'd been left behind, was picked up eventually and taken to a hospital as well. But what happens next? Will they go back to their mountain villages for the winter? Probably. Will there even be tents for them there? Maybe, if they're lucky.
"60 Minutes" is always on CBSNews.com, sponsored by Theraflu. Theraflu, warm, soothing relief for even the most monstrous cold. Theraflu, good to be back.